I am joining you from scenic San Diego, where I've been down here for the Southern California Ember conference, which is something that was put together by a consulting company called Dockyard in the Ember community. It was really fantastic. They did a great job. I'm on the Ember.js core team. I've been working on Ember for like 2 years on the core team, and I guess contributing for 3 or 4. I run a small consulting company called 2Uncreated and write at madheaded.com if you want to see anything else about what we're talking about here. Last year at EmberConf, Tom Yehuda tried to frame like the next year of what we were focusing on Ember by calling Ember an SDK for the web. And really that's all about talking about the web and the fact that Ember has a more, I think, of a mono focus on the web. I think there's less interest in adopting something like a native API or something like that for Ember. We are interested in doing all that we can to make the web itself a really productive place for you. And that's because the web is a really neat platform. Portability on the web is pretty much unmatched. Your ability to write an app and have it work on any of these devices without the user needing to install anything, to just be able to work with their experience. The web also, of course, is very connected in terms of social. Sorry, trying to turn off a heater here. Oh. Sorry. Yeah, the web is also very connected in terms of both networks of pages and people. It's very easy for my mother to send me a link to something, and I've never had her send me a link to an application or something like that. So we think that's pretty great. And then the web also has like a pretty traditional, understandable security policies, single origin policy, and like is a pretty secure and robust platform where the user can understand what they expect the page to have access to and adjust that. The web is very forward safe. As we add features to the web, it's kind of like adding these layers to the Russian doll. We don't crush the doll at the beginning, so we can still use the with API in JavaScript. That's still a valid JavaScript to write in your app. If you wrote it using with, isn't going to break yet. But at the same time, we've been adding more and more layers to the outside to make the web more and more featureful. And all of that seems to be coming to a head right now, both driven by all this work with people on frameworks, and also the browser platforms themselves are doing really interesting stuff. So Ember is really all about the web. We think it's a fantastic way to build applications. And so Ember's role is really as this SDK. And so we view our role more as a support library for helping you to be really productive on this platform that the browsers are providing. And this is motivated by the fact that the web is getting pretty complicated. Look at all these features that were just added in IE 11, like 3 years ago. I have been doing a lot of web development, and I don't think I've ever used the viewport size CSS value of 8VW. I don't think I've ever used the natural width and natural height properties. There's a whole bunch of things on here that I have not touched, and that's pretty amazing that this is a 3-year-old part of our platform, that there's still a lot of it that we haven't touched yet. And I think this is also borne out by looking at kind of new initiatives that happen in the community. So progressive web apps are kind of I think a really good standard for you to aim for. The tenets here are that we want something to be reliable, fast, and engaging. That all seems good, right? Nobody's going to say, I don't want my app to be fast and engaging. We all want these things. So let's look at the recommendations for what we're supposed to do to achieve these goals for a baseline app. Okay, I need HTTPS. That's easy. Responsive design is a little bit trickier. Service worker, that's brand new. Web app manifest, JSON API, I can probably do some like JSON stuff. That'll be fine. Cross-browser is a little bit tricky, but you can probably nail it down. URLs, which is pretty good, a little bit tricky, but that's fine. Make sure I do server-side rendering so I can make sure I'm rendered or caught by Google. Metadata information, that's pretty easy. Page history API can be a little bit tricky to pick up. Make sure the page doesn't move around with the page roles, a whole bunch of stuff with scrolling. That seems really hard. Make sure the inputs aren't obscured by the on-screen keyboard. Responsive on phone and desktop. Make sure the home screen prompt is intercepted. Cache-first networking. Inform the user when they're offline. Shouldn't the browser do that for me? Don't be overly aggressive with my push notifications. Dim the screen when permission request is showing. Be timely, precise, and relevant. This is actually a lot of stuff, right? This is like a complicated platform. And the idea that you need to figure all this out for your own application can be pretty daunting. And that's why Ember is really here to work for you. This is what we mean when we say an SDK for the platform. The idea is that Ember is going to give you a hand, and you're not alone in trying to figure out how to build a progressive web app or how to build a productive, fast site. We want to provide a reliable baseline for you to adopt that will be something that you can use in a variety of contexts. So who's been like using Ember. This is a bunch of companies, and I think that's something that's interesting about this list of companies is that you can kind of see where Ember is succeeding. An app like Intercom, which is a very rich interaction with real-time notifications for customer support. That's a very complicated dashboard kind of application. FreshBooks is accounting software with invoicing and time tracking and things like that. Again, complicated dashboard interactions. LinkedIn's new desktop website and their mobile website, which are pretty rich in terms of their interaction. So there's a lot of things on here that are like complex, ambitious applications, which is kind of what Ember's original tagline was, which was a framework for building ambitious applications. And I think we kind of hit that formula pretty well. We're pretty successful there. Three main tenets to Ember's general aim, like what we strive for. This SDK for the web to be focused on the web platform. I think the Ember community has a very possibly because we're very community oriented. There's no like large backer or anything like that. Well, LinkedIn is backing more and more, but regardless, I think culturally we have a very iterative approach to problem solving. We try to enhance what we have, and we try to replace what we have with something that's completely compatible. And it means that it takes us longer to get to some of the end goals than if you're building up a greenfield app from scratch using only new browser support. But we tend to move forward as a community, and old apps upgrade with us. So there are apps that are like 3 or 4. It's not uncommon for an Ember app to be 3 or 4 years old and still upgraded on the latest version of Ember, which is pretty cool. And then the ambitious app formula, which we really seem to be nailing. So what is going on in Ember 2.11? Just this last Monday, Ember.js 2.11 was released, and the thing to remember about Ember releases before we talk about what's in 2.11 is that they operate on a train model. So 2.11 came out on January 23rd, and on November 30th, 2.10 came out. The goal of Ember's releases is that about every 6 weeks, in theory, every 6 weeks exactly, we release a new minor version of Ember. Minor versions in SemVer compatibility are non-breaking changes, and major versions are supposed to be breaking changes. This means that you should be able to upgrade every 6 weeks to the latest version, and the framework itself should be making sure that your code works. It's not your responsibility to figure that out. It also means you can plan for these releases in the future, which is pretty great. If that pace of upgrades of every 6 weeks is too fast, Ember has a long-term support channel. And the other neat thing about 2.12, which is not the current version of Ember, 2.11 just came out, but 2.12 is going to be a candidate for a long-term support release. And once that is released, it'll replace 2.8. So those basically happen twice a year. And LTS has bug fixes for every 6 cycles and security updates for 10 release cycles of Ember. So you're talking like a viable platform for not needing to keep up with the churn of the framework itself and pay too much attention day to day to what's happening. So the cool thing that happened in Ember 2.10, which was a previous release, is that we landed a big rewrite of the rendering engine called Glimmer, or Glimmer 2 is actually what we kind of named it, since there was another initial version of Glimmer that came out in 1.13. And really the initial version of Glimmer that came out was trying to adopt a lot of the DOM diffing lessons that we took away from React's algorithm and try and mutate them and iterate on them a little bit and then add them to Ember. And 1.13 worked really well for a lot of the cases which seemed very relevant at the time for re-rendering a page. It didn't do as well for initial rendering, and so we had to pay down some debt there. And Glimmer 2 is basically taking those algorithms, taking a fresh stab at them using TypeScript and a bunch of other great tools, and really coming up with what I think is a shockingly excellent system. If you're interested in compilers, if you're interested in virtual machines, I think the Glimmer 2 code base is a really fantastic thing to take a dive into, and you'll be really interested in what's in there. But the main focus of landing it in 2.10 was backwards compatibility, not performance or any of those other goals, really. So we wanted it to be as easy to upgrade as changing the version number, and that did work. This is Travis CI's web interface is built in Ember, and this is their upgrade process from 2.9 to 2.10, which is great. They upgrade Ember, and they upgrade Ember data, and that was pretty much it. We weren't focusing on performance in terms of the integration with Ember. We were focusing entirely on backwards compatibility. The stuff that Sean brought up earlier about a test plan, like we heavily invested in our test plan to make sure that process went smoothly, and it went pretty smooth this time. However, there were some nice performance boosts that we got out of it kind of for free. The way that we compile templates is now what we call a wire format, which is similar to opcodes. They're very, very stripped down. There's no actual JavaScript code. There's just data that's being sent for our templates. And that means that the templates themselves are much, much smaller. So a 30% reduction in like the British gas app, which is, a pretty massive impact. And then there's also, of course, initial rendering performance improvements, which were pretty dramatic, which we're really, really happy with seeing. If you want to read more about what happened in 2.10 and Glimmer 2, it's really exciting, but it is the past, and we want to get to the future here. So if you go to emberjs.com/blog, there's a recent post on there about the 2.11 release, and you can find the 2.10 release. And if you go to my blog on madhead.com, the latest article on there is 5 things to know about Ember 2.10 and Glimmer 2, and it's kind of a good unofficial breakdown of what's going on. I can take a little bit more liberty with performance numbers and things like that, since it's not an official blog post. So I encourage you to take a look. In Ember 2.11, because of that big focus in Ember 2.10 on getting Glimmer 2 to land in a stable, backwards compatible manner, 2.11 is actually pretty light. There's not a lot that went into its beta cycle. So the big thing is that Ember source, the Ember source code itself for when you're using Ember with Ember CLI, our build tool, is now delivered by NPM instead of Bower. It turns out that Polymer isn't the only one who still has a little bit of Bower left, but this really marks I think the last threshold of things that are built into Ember CLI that require Bower. So we're very happy to be across that finish line. We launched a new Ember welcome page. So this is the page when you boot up Ember apps. This is a very new developer-friendly interface to try and get them started. And Ember data performance has been a big priority, driven by some of the people at LinkedIn and the use cases that they have there. In Ember 2.12, which currently is in beta, so when we released 2.11, we also released 2.12 beta, which then has 6 weeks before it matures into a stable release. We've added a new API called Factory 4, which is in addition to our dependency injection system. The goal here is really that the old system, when it did dependency injection extensions of classes, it would say extend and then add the injections as a subclass. That is not very performant. It means that every time you have dependency injections, you're doing extra extends on the class system. So we needed to provide an API for fetching a factory that would move away from that, so that people can adopt the new API, and then we can get rid of the double extend, which will be a performance improvement. So that lands in 2.12, and the old API is actually private API, so we may remove it in 2.13, and this should be another switch that we flip, which is a performance improvement. Ember CLI defaults to ESLint, which is great. NPM is no longer included with Ember CLI. Ember CLI for a long time supported Node 0.12, and it was on the version of NPM that shipped with that was not very reliable, so we just bundled our own. But getting rid of it, since we can now drop support, because Node's LTS policy drop support for 0.12 means that now we don't need to include it. Ember CLI install times go down, become a lot better. And then rendering performance of the actual initial render performance. There's been some iteration on top of Glimmer that's been happening in the Glimmer repo, which will be completely transparent from Ember's perspective, but will have further template size reductions and also further rendering performance improvements. If you want to try this out, npm install-g ember-cli and 2.12.0 beta 1, and then run Ember new, and you'll be running the beta version of Ember, and you can try it out. And you should go to the blog again to see more about this release in detail. There's obviously a lot of other small things that have changed. Cool. So, what a... Yeah, I got 1 or 2 more things. Yeah, sorry. I'll be pretty quick. What about the future? Because I know that 2.12 is not far enough in the future. So I wanted to just talk quickly about some stuff that we've maybe figured out in Ember that we're looking to focus on this year. In Ember, when we're building a framework, we want to build a framework for those ambitious apps. So we would add component UI and testing, and then the framework, of course, will need something for URLs, so it'll need routing. We'll need a way to do DI, because that's needed if you're going to use a large code base and you're going to have lots of people working on it. We need a way to do isolation with Ember Engines and lazy loading, which has landed now. That's a standard thing in Ember that you can install with the Ember Engines add-on. You need a data layer to sync with the server, so we have Ember Data. Server-side rendering with Fastboot, which is another thing that people are actively using in production, and you need a real security policy and release policy. And for a big scale application, for a big, complex, ambitious app, that's great. And Ember actually has all of these things now, which is pretty incredible. We've built up really, really far. But what we found while we were building up is that often when you're trying to work on a application, there's this range of complexity, and when you start a project, it's very difficult to know where you're going to fall on that range. And so if you aim high, Ember is going to serve you really, really well. And if you end up being that high complexity, Ember is going to be a great fit for that experience. The problem is that sometimes you guess high, but your complexity is actually low. And when that happens, Ember's not necessarily going to be the perfect tool. And we don't really have a tool that starts at very low complexity. So I think our challenge for this year is how we can actually make the framework scale down in complexity instead of being able to scale up. And some of our ideas for that are to move more code into add-ons. Ember Engines is completely written as an add-on, which is great. So if you don't care about isolation and lazy loading, you just don't even have that code. Ember landed an RFC recently. Our request for comment is how we make changes to the project. We landed a new RFC for the ES modules API in Ember, which means you can import a component from add ember/component instead of using the Ember global. That'll let us tree shake, but our goal here is to tree shake your app and Ember's internals and any add-on internals all at the same time. So we don't want Ember to be like pre-built and then it's just like I have Ember or I don't. We actually want you to shake out parts of Ember that you're not using as well. Project Svelte is this concept that we have about inverse feature flags. So if you have, Ember 2.10 has a lot of deprecations from previous APIs that we've been, trying to remove, but that code is still there because it's deprecated. It's not removed. But we want a way for people who don't have any deprecations in their current code base to be able to throw away all of that code that supports those deprecations. And that'll be basically a contract that you adhere to. You say, I say that my app has no deprecations, and thus you get this svelted part of the build that doesn't have any of those features in there. Better decomposition of Ember to be able to use Glimmer alone or dependency injection alone. Incremental rendering to be able to do things like render above the fold or render inside of a budget of time and then continue the rest if the work is still valid. And in general, trying to use the platform itself a little bit more to use its class system and things like that instead of our built-in class system as soon as we can make that migration smoothly. So if you want to hear more, EmberConf is March 20th and 29th in Portland, Oregon. And if you're interested in Ember or interesting conference over 2 days, I encourage you to come by and check it out. And that's about it, Tracy.
Thank you so much. That's amazing. It's really cool to see the exciting things that are happening in Ember. I have two questions. One is, can you go more into depth on lazy loading with Ember?
Yeah, so Ember engines provide an API that is kind of the idea is that it is strictly isolated by design. So we've created the API interface in between your engine and your application code base is really strictly defined, and there's configuration hooks if you want to remap the name of something on one side to a name on a different side. A good example of this might be something like a URL. So if you're inside of an engine, you might want to link to something in the main app, but if you're used in several applications, that route on the outside might have a different name. So we actually provide an interface that allows you to remap routes that you link to from inside the engine to outside the engine. So engines are built like that, and because they have that strong interface, that well-designed interface, it also means that we can just lazily drop them into the application code. We can asynchronously load them. So there's two ways you load a lazy engine. One is via a component type interface where the UI component in the tree actually shows up late. And the second version is via a route. So say if you're on a blog engine, you have a /admin. That would be a lazy engine. If you want to check that out, there's an ember-engines.com website that goes into a lot of detail.
Richard is wondering, are there any plans to bring CSS modules into Ember? He's been trying it with React lately, and it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think the Ember community as a whole has not, if I had to guess what the zeitgeist said, I don't think the zeitgeist in the Ember community feels like they've settled on one resolution for how to do CSS yet. I think it is definitely an acknowledged problem, and there's lots of interesting work going on of people trying different approaches. I do think that one of our goals maybe like probably this year is to do better at inline styles in general, which is not to say that's a holistic solution, but we're trying to, we used to joke about a thing called HTML bars, which was handlebars, but it understood HTML. Now we talk about a thing called CSS bars, which is a parser for handlebars templates that understands the style that you have as inside a style attribute on a DOM node. So we'd like to get that done. That'll also help with security because there's XSS vulnerabilities inside of style tags or style attributes, and we want to be able to protect apps against that by default.
Adios Manny asks, I wonder how much thinner Ember's core might get, efforts beyond Svelte.
Yeah, I think like I said, our challenge I think is to try and scale down in complexity, and I think the nice spot about being in that vantage point is when you're building up from a point of simplicity and you're adding layers on top, there's many opportunities for for apps to diverge and have different versions of what they think the end goal for a complicated app should be. By starting with the thing that is Ember, which is like this holistic recommendation for this is how you build complex web applications, and stripping it down, it means that you can always see what the end goal is if you need to scale up. So I think the concept of Ember should remain a holistic, this is how you build a complex app. I think what we want to do is make the technical part of that limitation, where right now you literally need all that code, and we want to make that less and less so that technically you can use only parts of it.
Last question, that's a kind of a cute one. I like it. If you had $1 million to spend on making Ember better, which wish list items would you be?
Oh my God, that's a question for someone at LinkedIn. That's not a question for me. If I had $1 million to spend on Ember, and what would I do to make it better? I mean, I'm a little bit blinded by the things that I think are fascinating, right? So there are, I think the most important challenges are actually around the data layer. Data synchronization back and forth to servers is usually a woefully under-discussed part of building a single-page application, and woefully under-architected. Ember data has a lot of good work in it, but there are things around immutable data structures and forking the data store that it does not have as a very mature solution yet. There are concepts of communicating with the server over HTTP push and over WebSockets as an alternative to making requests that are not very mature yet. And then there are the problems of offline data syncing, which are not very mature yet. And I think that those are problems that almost require like frameworks and solutions holistically on their own. But I think that is a major point where as you're building really hard things, once you get into it, you end up solving those problems in bespoke ways, and the solutions are not shared. And I would love to have a shared solution that was as more mature than Ember Data is even for dealing with data syncing.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Matthew. It was really great.
Hey there. Do you use Angular? Do you like fun in the sun? And how do you feel about boats? If you're nodding yes, then come join us on NG Cruise to learn more about Angular while on a fabulous Caribbean cruise. Check out ngcruise.com for speaker lineup, workshop details, and to book your spot today.